Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Let's Talk Astrology. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by astrologer Molly Pekula. So, thank you so much for joining us today. And how are you doing?
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. So, in today's episode, we're talking about activating your Dharmic design and asking ourselves questions along the lines of why do so many talented people either feel stuck, burnt out, or struggle with imposter syndrome? And really, how can we align ourselves with our true calling this lifetime? And Molly, you've put together a beautiful presentation, so let's dive in.
Sure. I'd just like to preface that we will be looking, through the lens of sidereal zodiac through Vedic astrology. So the charts will be in the wheel when I get into examples, but keep in mind we are using the sidereal zodiac. And for those coming from Western, I find looking at in the wheel helps your brain kind of adjust and still see the aspects and etc. pretty easily.
It's
So.
a really good point talking about what zodiac you're using, because of course, probably most of our audience are used to the tropical zodiac. And we talked about this before the recording, but often you find when students come in, there's a sense of identity crisis. So if you're used to your tropical chart that you pull up, once you move it into sidereal, there's often an identity crisis, and you go, and hold on a minute, everything is changed, not only the angles, but some of the planets in signs. And one of the things I always say is that, it's always best to look in multiple different branches of astrology. Many of us have identity crisis when we're looking at house systems, for example. So if we have students come in 101, we primarily use whole sign. But of course, if you're used to a quadrant house system and say Placidus, a lot of people will have an identity crisis if they see those planets in the 12th move into the first. But I think it's an important point to make. And I'm paraphrasing here, but the great Robert Hand was once talking to Stephen Forrest, and he said he pretty much brushed it up to the question of which is more correct, French or German. And I thought that was such a great comment from Rob Hand because it's literally, we might be speaking different languages, but for me, they're all correct. So I think it's always important to experiment in different ways of using astrology.
And Richard Tarnas, I think, said in his book, all true maps must converge. And I 100% agree. I always say it's like looking at the customary versus the metric system. They're measuring the same thing, they're just using a different ruler.
Absolutely. I love that. Wonderful.
Yeah, so I really love the Vedic philosophy because the crux of what we're going to talk about today is one's dharma. And to me, kind of one of the main points of astrology is not just to connect us to the timing of things unfolding in our life and understanding the cycles we're in, but connecting to our greater duty, purpose, mission in life. And that's really in the Vedic viewpoint, what brings us into the most fulfillment and allows the most flow. So I really like to teach and share astrology from a very empowered lens that empowers people to be kind of firing in their purpose. And we'll get into that in this talk, and we're going to give some examples of how that works. But that's kind of the why behind looking into all of this and what Dharma really is. It's being in that state of natural flow with what you feel your truth of what you came here for is. So as you mentioned, a lot of people, they're talented or they have passions or they're even in jobs that they enjoy on some level, but then they're feeling a little burnt out or sometimes feel like something is missing or have this idea of, am I in the right path? That's like a very common question people come to astrologers with. So, Dharma is not career, they're not equivalent. However, you can apply your Dharma into your vocation, into your workplace. And when we are operating in a workplace, in a career without Dharma, it can feel like chasing status, going after just material security, um, really running ourselves ragged, working maybe harder and not smarter, and because you're kind of not connected to your higher purpose. So then you can get an autopilot and it's not really energizing you or feeding you on a deeper level. But when we know our Dharma and are connected to it, work actually can energize us and we can feel a sense of flow. And the idea is that actually everything flows from that place. Once we align to our Dharma, these are the houses 1, 5, and 9 in the birth chart. when we connect on to those levels of our soul, then artha, the material security, follows. We understand how to use our purpose to acquire resources we need and get paid for it. We then attract the right connections and relationships, which is karma, the third aim of life. And then we are on a kind of spiritual evolution, the moksha, fourth aim. So these are like four pillars or aims of life in the Vedic philosophy. And the idea is when we connect to align to our dharma, the other things flow naturally.
I love how you make the distinction between vocation and calling because often that is not aligned together. What we do in our workplace, what our current career is. And as you're talking about, if you're not aligned with what your true calling is, you might have that sense of burnout or going through the motions. Yes, it might be, you might be financially stable, but you might have that niggling feeling that you're not quite on the right path. So what do you usually find with clients who are not aligned with their Dharma? What kind of roadblocks do you see in their lives?
And I've been there too. Like, I think every person has worked a job just for the material side of it. Often years of our life, right? We might work jobs for that material security because, unfortunately, that is very prized in modern society and it's important. We need money to survive. But the most common thing I would say is defaulting to karmic patterns in the chart rather than rather than aligning to their dharma. So that looks like maybe the pressure, being more pressured through societal conditioning or material needs or survival fears than really going for what fulfills them on a deeper level. So that could be like working from a house system in astrology, defaulting to the sixth house of becoming kind of enslaving themselves in a kind of way, like to servitude, or, because sometimes people are like connected to their why and they're operating more from like, oh, I have to do this. This is an obligation. And or perhaps just chasing the 10th house status and recognition, but not aligning that to something deeper or their why, or even just more their own unique individuality. They might just kind of fall into, well, I'm gonna go up to climb this certain ladder because that'll give me a certain amount of respect. Or 12th house themes like escaping into to kind of fantasy and having burnout cycles where they're not really, seeing things clearly. There could be some distortions there.
It's quite interesting because I think this kind of permeates through the astrology community because, of course, many of us, I love what I do, working at Kepler, teaching in front of students or doing a podcast. And many of astrologers, as we know, they might have left very lucrative positions in maybe they've been in marketing or finance, all these different areas. So they go and find their calling in astrology. And yes, it might, astrology, unless you make it big in terms of the name and the clientele that you either bring in, or but for those who are struggling but they really think it's their calling, I think that we really do find that in the astrology community where it's about their passion for the astrology rather than material gain.
And I would say, this process that we're going to go through could help them because um, because the one first, fifth, and ninth house aren't necessarily going to tell us like what job to do. We can do whatever. We can apply our dharma to any role, but it will help them, maybe the people listening, align to the way they can express their path and be more true to themselves in that role. So the first, fifth, and ninth houses that we're going to talk about and really highlight in this talk are also known as the Lakshmi houses in Vedic philosophy, and Lakshmi is the goddess of prosperity. And prosperity in this viewpoint isn't just material wealth, though of course that's part of it. It's also being in that flow state where you magnetize the right friendships, allies, communities, because you're naturally magnetic. You're naturally in alignment to your truth, to your path. And then yeah, the right kind of partnerships come in, the right kind of flow comes into your life to support that. And wealth, the idea is that we give it back too, right? It's like a water currency, right? It's something that we put outward, take in, it's flowing. So as I mentioned before, in many of the texts, they talk about how Artha, which is that material security, and Kama, desire for connection and pleasure and all those things, should be pursued with the help of Dharma. And that when we pursue wealth without the Dharma behind it, it's like a tree with no roots. It can grow, but it might not stand the test of time in storms. And it can also be like we get the money, but then maybe we spend it just as quick. We don't hold on to it because it can create just kind of like a weirdness around what we're earning because it's not really in alignment with what we want to be doing. Often, if you have a job that feels like it sucks your soul, but oh, pays really well, a lot of those people spend that money just as quickly because they're still seeking that deeper fulfillment, right?
So with clients that you've worked with, how can you tell the difference between somebody who may or may not be on the right path in terms of alignment, but maybe they're going just through a block or a difficult period?
Yeah. Um, I would say that when you're going through just a block, but you still you're in alignment, you're gonna feel still very driven to do the thing. Like, you just have that sense that this is still the right thing. And I would do it kind of no matter what. I really feel like it's that intense. Whereas when it's something that you're just kind of putting up with, it's gonna feel more like draining of your life force, if that makes sense. Like, oh, I feel blocked. Where when it's connected to our higher path, we were like, you know what, I'm gonna keep going anyway.
Wonderful.
It's the first, fifth, and ninth houses are actually the fire houses, right? They're the houses that are traditionally ruled by Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. And they say in astrology, one of my astrology teachers shared this. I think it was Gemini Brett actually who said this. He said, fire is the element, the one element you can give and share without losing any of your own. And I really like that. And I view it kind of as operating on three cylinders of our fuel for life. Like I think of the Dharma houses, it's like the fuel, it's like the thing that like drives us forward. And so the three kind of ways to connect to like what is my higher purpose is these houses, which we'll take a look at and look at some examples to bring it to life. Your Atmakarika, which is your soul planet. And this is the planet that holds the highest degree. And if your Western astrologers watching, you can still figure that out. Obviously, it's only until the planet Saturn, because in traditional Vedic system, they don't use outer planets. But basically, which planet holds the highest degree? And I believe that's exclusive of the nodes. But yeah, that would be like your soul planet. We could say that's like one of our prime motivators. You could also look at like the ruler of the ascendant, of course, factor that in. But also this idea of Varna, which is our contribution path. And this is more of like a type of role that we take on, though they're not super fixed. But this is something that you determine kind of through a combination of knowing that I'm a Karka, the plant that holds the highest degree, looking at the ruler of the ascendant, and also the moon ruler. Those can all help you kind of narrow down what contribution path is yours. And I actually have on my website, radiantguidance.com, or even if you go to life-map.org, I have two websites. Either one you can do my little mini course that's free and figure out, and I have a handout that describes all of the four types in depth. But you can do that. Basically, the four contribution paths are teacher, leader, creative, and steward. And some people can just look at these and kind of naturally feel intuitively which path is theirs. And in some charts, it is quite obvious where it's like one clear path kind of dominates. But for many people, it might be a combination of two, right? Where the planetary influence kind of is two paths that they combine, can be kind of like a hybrid. But the idea is like the teacher is kind of the person that is here to guide, here to share wisdom with others, to guide them. Leaders are those who have a kind of cause that they are working for. Creatives are here to bring things into the physical form. So that's where a lot of like artisans come in, people that even just create, things like different technologies, like people that literally are bringing something new into physical form for the for the greater good. And then stewards, the people that then sustain systems, or I also kind of call this last group like embodiers. These can be the people that really keep the systems running and in place. And in all societies, the idea is that all societies have a combination of these kind of paths and they work together, right? They work in unison because some contribution paths just have different strengths than other people. I definitely fall more into the teacher as my dominant path in this life. And, the steward people I know who are very much more about like maintaining the order of things and of service in that way can sometimes help me where I can be good at guiding people, but not very good at embodying certain things. So sometimes my steward friends help me like more embody things I need. So we all help each other. And in teams or organizations, I think it's really helpful for people to know what their main contribution path is. So they're placed appropriately, so they're in a placement that is the most rewarding to their natural gifts.
Absolutely wonderful. I just want to go back to which will be a point of contention because I can see the comments coming in already. So we
Mhm.
alluded there to what is called in astrology the 12-letter alphabet or the natural houses. Now,
Mhm.
going back to our original introduction, I think it's important to keep an open mind. Of course, many evolutionary astrologers use the 12-letter alphabet. It's not everybody's astrology, it's not mine. But at Kepler College, we have a broad range of different ways of looking at astrology. And going back to what we were saying before, where you're using sidereal, using the tropical, where you do using different house systems. I think sometimes in astrology, people get to the point where they find something that works and then they argue to the cows come home that everything else is wrong and all that they're doing is right. But as we said before, what Robert Hand was saying is that what is more correct, French or German? So just because different astrologers are speaking different languages doesn't mean right or wrong, even though obviously there's always points of contention in astrology. And of course, house systems has been one of those in the last couple of years. So sorry, I just wanted to point that out because I can see the comments coming through already.
About house system?
About the 12-letter alphabet, so the first house equating to Aries and so on through the zodiac or the natural houses. So, of course, many evolutionary astrologers move along those paths. So, I just wanted to make the point before all the comments coming in about the 12-letter alphabet is that one of the important things I think what we teach at Kepler is to have a broad mind and let people from many branches of astrology say their piece and say what they want to say.
Cool, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So the idea of aligned with the Dharma then comes down to these Lakshmi houses, which is who we are. Really, our Dharma is a combination of who we are, our gifts, and what the world needs. So really just aligning those three areas. And when we can fire on all three cylinders, that's great. I've had clients, that maybe they're doing work where it's like their creative gift, but then they felt and maybe they're great, they're expressing themselves in their creative gifts, but then that ninth house piece is missing where they come to me and they're like, well, my work is awesome, I run this business, it's my creative gift, but something is missing. And it doesn't always mean, quitting what you're doing and jumping into a completely different profession or role, in the context of bringing your dharma into work, but sometimes it's just pivoting a little bit or tweaking what you're already doing in a way that then aligns with that ninth house of, applying it to something that's connected to like a higher service, your higher truth, a bigger cause, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love this description because, of course, the first house is how we embody ourselves. So we can talk about leadership style, how we approach other people. It's the mask that we wear. Of course, the fifth house is, as we put here, the creative gifts, where you've gone. And here we're below the horizon. But as we get above the horizon, we're in the ninth house. And you've got here higher service. They can also talk about higher philosophy, how you're serving the world in that sense through those higher realms and what you can give again above the horizon out in the public. Whereas the first, the fifth, we're talking about how we're developing those skills as we progress through life.
Hmm. And, to give an example to what I've kind of been speaking to leading up to this, I have an example here of a very well-known figure, a very charismatic leader, who very much lived in, alignment to his dharma. His This is Steve Jobs, obviously, if you can't tell, but yeah, it says right there. But he embodies very much his Varna type is very much that of the leader, the person that has that vision. And then, a creative, right? Bringing new products into the collective and sharing that, with a very future foresight. But we could say, he was a very charismatic leader, with the sidereal Leo rising. And he created with this kind of Sagittarian, his fifth house is that Sagittarian, like big picture, like wanting something that had a large impact and was very visionary, using technology in a very creative way. And then his ninth house, which was serving by pioneering the future, really being that trailblazer, really being the person that was like a squeaky wheel, you could say. And that's a lot of his quotes. If you hear him talk or how he talked, you could tell that his ninth house why was very connected to like pioneering the future, think different was his one of his the mottos of Apple. But yeah, he said, we're here to put a dent in the universe. And I think he was the one that said the difference between like it's like the people that think they're crazy enough to change the world are the ones that do. I think that's a Steve Jobs quote. But that kind of embodies like what his why was. And anyone with these fire signs on those houses aren't, it doesn't mean they're necessarily all going to go into that specific type of occupation or role, but we can just see the way he connected to his Dharma was very much in line with these themes.
This is such a wonderful chart example. And I said before the recording, you've got me onto a kick of looking at charts again in their side reel. How do I pronounce it? It's Lahare. Is that, I don't know if I'm
Yeah,
pronouncing that
Lahiri,
correct.
I think people say.
Lahiri. But you got me into a kick of, I've not looked at a sidereal chart for many years, and I pulled up my own and looking at Steve Jobs, and I was like, this chart works as well, as you're pointing out, with the first, the fifth, and the ninth. They are literally in fire. And even with that domicile Mars in Aries, that's both in the tropical and the sidereal. So that's for me like a double whammy. You pointed out the fifth house. We've got that Jupiter ruling the fifth in the 11th. I know you don't have the outer planets here, but that's conjunct Uranus as well. So I'm so glad you brought up these chart examples because I'm like, wow, looking at these different charts, I think this works really, really well as well in terms of that lead with a bold vision, that creative expansion and
Mhm.
foresight, and of course that pioneering attitude he had in with Apple. So I love this chart example.
Yeah. And we can see he's a person that has pretty prominent placements in his first, fifth, well, his fifth and ninth, like, right? He's got his North Node there, Venus there, and then Mars. And we can see that in his chart, the planet holding the highest degree is Venus, I believe. Yep. And,
Mm,
that's located in his fifth house. So, like, he was really like a lot of his path was sharing his creative gifts, like designing things, literally designing products and bringing products into the community, but also being this trailblazer, right? Being
mm.
someone that wasn't afraid to kind of do things in a very new way.
Can you
And then
touch again on, sorry, can you touch again on the highest degree and why you find that's important?
that's called the Atmakarka. So the planet that holds the highest degree
Mm.
is the Atmakarka. And by the way, I do actually use outer planets when I work with clients. I don't like
Awesome.
ignore them, but for this exercise, I didn't include them just so the chart's a little cleaner and so we can more easily define the Atmakarka through this system. Oh, and one more thing I was going to say about his chart. His ascendant obviously is a sun-ruled ascendant, and the leader archetype is very much connected to the sun. Like every of the four archetypes I mentioned, they all have planetary correspondences. So the teacher is very much Jupiter and the moon. Leader, warrior, they call it as well, is more the sun and Mars. The creatives are Venus and Mercury. And then finally, those I call them embodiers, but they're also called stewards, are Saturn, connected to the planet Saturn. So then we have another very well-known figure, Maria Montessori, who pioneered in her way too, although she wouldn't call it that. And that's kind of where it gets interesting into the Dharma. She, really was a steward of students, of children, and she wrote books. She was a teacher, and that was her main thing was education. But she even says in her quote, I didn't invent a method of education. I simply gave some little children a chance to live. So a lot of her purpose was really embodying this very nurturing guardian archetype of creating safe spaces for children to express themselves, to teach them in a way that was like in alignment with their developmental stage. And a lot of her work was very informed by spiritual teachings. And so she was this nurturing guardian who then in her fifth house facilitated transformation, soul transformation, Scorpio, with these intuitive systems that she essentially developed, Saturn in the fifth, like creating these very mystical systems. And then served by then using education in the ninth house there as this tool for spiritual growth. Like to her, it wasn't just about, okay, teaching kids things to memorize and to learn facts. It was more about honoring their souls on like a very deeper developmental level. And so she wrote a lot of books and this was her mission. And then it later was like, okay, well, you invented this new system. But she even says, she was like, I was just kind of doing my job of stewarding these children and meeting them where they're at, creating the system that felt like aligned with their soul growth. She was very inspired by theosophy and uh, a lot of the Eastern spiritual traditions, like that view, the soul as on this evolutionary path. I mean, probably, who knows, maybe astrology too. And then, yeah, it was very much kind of a healing, nurturing role that she had. And again, she's got a lot. Her first, fifth, and ninth house are pretty loaded, especially her first house. So she was very connected to that like mission. And it's not to say if you don't have planets in those houses, you're not. It's then looking at, yeah, where do the rulers of those houses sit? And then you can kind of find clues as to how to express your purpose.
This is such a wonderful charted example, and again, why I'm so happy you forced me to start looking in different zodiacs, because I think this chart works wonderfully for Maria as well. As you pointed out, we've got, other things we can point out, the rule of the fifth, on the just outside the cusp of the 12th, but you've got Mercury domicile in the third, rule in the 12th, you've got the rule of the ninth in the 12th. So you're speaking about the education component, the working with children who were, in sorrow. Didn't she work with those with severe disabilities as well, and
Mhm.
those who,
Yeah.
were confined in some way? So I
Yeah,
think this chart
Chiron and
really speaks.
Neptune in the ninth. Yeah.
Wow, yeah, really speaks to this chart. It's a wonderful example.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's good. It's like just look at your sidereal chart with just, yeah, like fresh eyes of just being open to the wisdom that wants to share with you. Because
That's a great.
it's
That
like how
that's a
different
wonderful.
different astrologers, like I've had many different Western astrologers meet read my chart and it might be the same system, but they have different transmissions and downloads for me.
That's such a wonderful prompt. So everybody watching, let us know in the comments below how much your chart changes, and if you give it some time to look at the sidereal chart, let us know what you find in that, or whether you use that primarily anyway. I'll be interested to see how everybody views their chart that way.
Yeah. And then, another very legendary figure, Toni Morrison. She was, for those who might not know, some of these people are more dated, obviously, but she was an author. Oh, and the one thing I wanted to say, well, I might get into that. I'm going to go into the transits of these figures,
Hmm.
but with Maria, she has Saturn in the fifth. She didn't come into really, like, she didn't write her book until later in life. And she was more of like a late bloomer. So I want to keep that in mind too. Like, some of you might have Saturn in some of these houses, and that can very much speak to that of finding or coming into your calling more delayed in life. And that's just some people's path.
I think that's such a wonderful point, because what we have to keep in mind, as we know when we look at a natal chart, we're looking at the snapshot of potential for the full lifetime. So if you're having a consultation with someone, say before their first Saturn return in their late 20s, that's a very different conversation to someone who's maybe in their late 60s. And again, where they are on their life path, because many people can just find their, alignment in, like you said, in a later stage. So sometimes when we tell students at Kepler, if you're working with a client or a chart, especially if they're younger, you can talk about potential, but sometimes you might come out with statements and they just look at you with a blank face thinking, that makes no sense. I have no idea what you're talking about. But many decades or years after that, that might come to fruition. And of course, that's when we start looking at the, transits,
Exactly.
regressions, everything. Yeah.
Natal promise is not, instantly fulfilled, right? And that's why some people, back to your original question of how do they know if they're just in this kind of sacred pause versus on the wrong path? I think Honestly, the transits help us illuminate that. So, and that's why I got into astrology because I felt so much like connected to like why I'm here. But then it's sometimes we're like, why am I blocked though? Or why isn't it showing up? And sometimes it just takes time. You know, astrology, it's the great Saturn teaching of like things just take time, to develop or to get
Absolutely.
activated or triggered. But don't stop putting in the work. And I think when you connect to your higher truth, then it's not really so much a question of am I on the right path? It's just, okay, when? Because failure isn't an option anymore. Because you know who you are and you know what your mission is. So Toni, yeah, she was a author, and she also was a person that had kind of a, I want to say, more delayed coming into her writing and voice. Like she was always a writer. I think well, no, she said she started writing like in her 30s. So some people might consider that kind of later in life to start a career, but she didn't get her maybe recognition until a little later in life for her writing. But she was really a voice to African American culture and spoke to that when she was growing up. Her childhood house was burned down. Like she was very much a victim of racism and very much saw those like great changes in that kind of world shift. But she wanted to be a voice to the stories and kind of preserve these, yeah, African American experiences that she didn't want to. She basically said the reason she wrote was she wanted to read. Like she was like, basically, if you want to be a writer, write what you would want to read about. And that was kind of what drove her. So she was this very embodied storyteller, Taurus rising. She had a very Taurus presence, like a deep, very earthy voice, and reads a lot of her stories, does readings of her writings. And
Would her, sorry to interrupt, would her writings, I'm not familiar with her, would her some of her writings be quite punchy in terms of the subject matters? Would it be
yeah,
quite deep and intense? Yeah, I was just looking at you've got that, the
love it.
chart ruler in the eighth applying to Saturn. So I wonder if the heavy themes maybe,
They
is
were.
that what she talks
They
about?
were.
Yeah.
Beloved is about a woman who has to kill her own child, like
Oh
to
shit.
save them
So
from
that's
slavery.
heavy.
It's
Wow.
it's very it's very
Wow.
exactly. It was like these very raw, visceral stories, and they were turned into movies, but and they were fictional, but they were informed through like a worldview that might have otherwise kind of been lost with time, because a lot of people don't realize the gravity of like some of these stories. And I'm sure a lot of them were passed down, right, through probably like her parents who lived through some of those time periods where people were slaves. So
Wow.
she, yeah, embodied this Taurus storyteller. Her voice was such a big, like, that's who she was to share her voice. But then the creative gift behind it is like, a lot of her prose was like very meticulous, and she would do all this historical accounting to make sure, these characters she was developing were historically accurate. And she would do a lot of research actually behind the characters and behind the stories she was crafting. So that, yeah, they were historically mirroring that accurately, that time period. And but again, the greater why was that ninth house of preserving cultural legacies, preserving the voice of those who, she said many stories that would be untold otherwise. So if it was like this greater kind of responsibility, it wasn't just like, oh, I'm a writer because I like to go into dystopian. Everyone can be a writer but have a different purpose behind it, right? And that's again why Dharma isn't a vocation per se, but you can apply it to whatever you are doing. So it's like, okay, it's kind of like the mechanics underneath what you're doing.
This is another wonderful chart example because what you're explaining to me here, embodying the storyteller, crafting meticulous prose in the service of preserving cultural legacies, and this is another wonderful example. We've got the Mercury connection to the fifth, ruling the fifth house. So again, these charts, looking at, and I implore everyone watching this to try out sidereal again and see what's going on your chart because this is really fascinating. So thank you for sharing these.
Yeah, no problem. And one thing I did want to point out is that South Node in her fifth house. The South Node is
Mm,
very much, I forgot to mention too, the fifth house is really, I love the way they view the fifth house in the Vedic philosophy is that it's the house of gifts we bring over from past lifetimes. And
absolutely.
I like that there's a lot of depth to that because in a way it's kind of like these are And that's kind of why these houses are considered blessed houses. They're considered very auspicious houses because they represent that which we carry over from past lifetimes. So the fifth is the creative gifts we bring from the past lifetime. So what we're naturally going to be very good at. And in her case, having South Node in her fifth house
Mm.
is like she probably had like many lifetimes of being a writer, in
Oh
Virgo.
yeah.
She that was something probably not new to her, but then it was, given new meaning in this lifetime. And then the ninth is it's the fulfill they say it's a blessed house because it's like the fulfillment of karma from past actions. So it can be opportunities that open up to us based on past actions from uh, past lifetimes. If you believe, of course, in reincarnation and that viewpoint.
Yeah.
But
Wonderful. Is she still with us? Well, she's born
yeah,
1931.
yeah,
Oh,
I think
wonderful.
she's like in her 80s maybe now, or maybe
I
even.
think, yeah, 90s or what. I was just saying, like the nodal returns as well. So bringing up the nodes as well. That's really quite fascinating.
And then, brings us to the next point, which is, uh, sometimes we're just gestating, like with a seed that we plant in the soil, it will sprout under the dirt, and we don't see it sprouting, and it can seem like nothing's happening externally. And I view that sometimes it's like we're on our path and we're in our Dharma perhaps, but we're not seeing the outward fruit of it yet, but it doesn't mean it's not sprouting and growing underneath the soil. And often it's these transits that then trigger the events that can really just kind of be that bridge that kind of activates, uh, it being more externally recognized or having those opportunities come in a very tangible way where it's like, okay, now I get to like, now we're like really in flow. So yeah, I like to say when you honor your timing, pauses are no longer mistaken for failure. I think that's a really important message for people. It's like don't quit or give up the thing you love because you're not seeing some external results. And the idea from Vedic perspective too is that when we're in dashas that activate any of these first, fifth, or ninth houses, dashas are greater time periods. If you study traditional Western astrology, it's kind of like zodiacal releasing is like the closest thing I could compare it to, maybe in the Western viewpoint, but that there's certain greater book chapters of our life that activate certain planets. And in all the examples I'm going to give, save for the very first, when Steve Jobs created Apple, he was not in a fifth house dasha, but all the rest of the examples that I'll give, the people were in fifth house dashas or time periods. So they were in time periods that were really recognizing their creative gifts. So that's something to also track and pay attention to. If you've been working at something for a long time, or like, when am I going to have my moment? Or when is the world going to recognize this? Or when can I do this, for a living? It might just be that you need to have one of those three houses time periods activated to really get the calling or have the calling be answered. And that
Sounds
can,
like you're emphasizing right timing. So you're making the point that in a practical sense, the clients that you're working with, you're looking for moments in time. And I think you put it in terms of a window of luck or opportunity where
yeah.
people can pull together and move forward.
Yeah, where they feel like they might finally be like, okay, like I'm doing it, because sometimes
Yeah.
we know what we want to be doing, and then it's like those triggers, maybe it's Venus or Jupiter, the benefic planets also transiting those houses. Even if you're not in the dasha, though that can be really important for these big life-changing kind of moments that in the examples will show really like where they were really like aligned, even just tracking Jupiter and Venus going through those houses can be really moments in your work that you're meant to kind of be in more action and really taking up and seizing opportunities that could be coming in for you. Because I don't know if you follow this, but I think it's kind of like transits are like waves. It's like, yes, there's certain fated things that are just going to happen from a transit, but it's almost like we need to meet it halfway and be the surfer catching the wave to really make the most of it and strike on these opportunities because the universe is like always wanting to bring us something, I think. So,
I love that point. And I see transits. I mean, I use them in conjunction, perfections, Lord of the Years, things of that nature. But I think what sometimes is the misconception is that people look at their chart and they think their chart is like a pinball machine, all the lights are on all the time. And of course,
Yeah.
as we know, that's not always the case. It's not always active. And even some transits come and go, and you think to yourself, oh, that didn't happen, or I was expecting this and one another. So it's important to not only look, as we talked about before, your natal promise, the transits, but layer on other techniques as well, because of course those transits can manifest. But I want on a tangent here. What are your thoughts on the malefics? Because we love the benefics, the Jupiter, the greater benefic. We've got Venus, but I find sometimes in my experience it's the malefics that really kick us up the arse to get things doing. Whether it's the Saturn return, whether it's a harsh Mars transit in terms of opposition or squares, because sometimes those harsher aspects are the diamond in the rough that has to get pressurized in order to get moving and not be sitting on the couch going, that's a wonderful idea, but when are you actually going to be, again, kicked up the arse to go and do it?
I 100% agree with you, especially, let's use Saturn as the example. Well, Mars also literally can really fire us up. Like, so I don't get scared of Mars transits. Mars is like, hey, where are you meant to take action right now? It can be a very good guide for us to know. Okay, and then there's certain areas we might be taking action and going and trying and trying and trying, but that's not what we're supposed to be focused on. Like someone might be like, I need to find a relationship, I need to find a relationship, but really the universe is wanting to help align them to their ideal work. But if they're so focused, that's why I love astrology. It's a very practical tool and guide that we have. It's like a cheat sheet in a way of knowing, like, okay, how can I channel my energy so I'm the most efficient? And to your point, like Saturn, 100%. The most feared, and this is why, I come to Vedic astrology with more of a Western open mind of not fearing and fear-mongering transits. Not that all Vedic astrologers do that, but they have something called the Sati Sati, which is the 7.5 year Saturn transit to the sign before, the sign of, and the sign after your natal moon. So this transit is considered, and I just ended mine, 7.5 years of bad luck. However, I've been doing extensive research on the Sati Sati. Many well-known people like Oprah became a billionaire, I think, or a millionaire, one of them in her Sati Sati. So Saturn transits actually trigger great achievement. So it's a different way to also understand that, yes, it might be like putting that weight and pressure on it, but just like a diamond gets formed under pressure, it's also when people reach their like highest achievement. And look at, I think of Saturn like it's like bodybuilding, right? Like it's that it'll put the weight on us, but then we get stronger because if you don't have that weight, you're just kind of not going to work the muscle. Like you're not working out. You're not. So and my friend, I just did a talk on KeplerCollege and he said it's like the thumbtacks in the seat or whatever. If you they make you get up, right? If you're leaning back in your seat and there's thumbtacks there, it's like, okay, yeah, exactly. I gotta move. So Saturn actually gives us a lot. All the planets are offering us something, even if the way they're going about it isn't the way we like.
Yeah, I love that point about Saturn is you will get the rewards if you put the hard work in, and that's what it's about.
Many people have achieved their greatest accomplishments during their Sati Sati. It doesn't mean to say it was an easy time period for them, but it's not a bad, transit.
Wonderful.
So yeah, growth seasons. I call transits they're like growth seasons, and transits to the first, fifth, and ninth in particular, especially if you're using the sidereal system, often mark key developments and opportunities aligned with your dharma or your path. And to give an example, we have when Steve Jobs created Apple, he had Jupiter pretty close, exactly 2 degree, right, from
Mm.
his natal Mars in his ninth. And that was a very, big step in his purpose, creating Apple. And then when he was in his Venus Dasha, which obviously I'm not going to go into how to like calculate that here, but if you can use apps like Cosmic Insights is a great app to just go to your Vimshoti Dasha and figure out what Dasha you're running. For Western astrology enthusiasts, I think if you look at one thing from Vedic astrology, just learn what Dasha or planetary period you're in because they're very long periods and it could just help you know what house is getting activated in your sidereal chart. So yeah, he was in a Venus dasha, so that fifth house period, which again, the first, fifth, and ninth house dashas, you could say are pretty auspicious. They can be very blessed in the way that it's like coming into that flow of our purpose. And so he's in the Venus Dasha, but he also, especially when IMAC was released, had again Mars and then Saturn conjoining his Mars, coming into approaching a conjunction with his natal Mars in his ninth. The North Node was coming into a conjunction with his, or perhaps separating, right? Because it goes backwards to his ascendant. And then when Pixar went public, his investment, he actually made that leap from a millionaire to a billionaire. Venus and Mars were both activating his North Node and his fifth house. So these are very like pivotal moments in people's lives. And that's, I love studying biographies and life events because they're factual and they help us understand like the gravity of like the timing of the thing and how real that is. That, wow, okay, so like when people have these great leaps, these great strides, what's going on that activates that?
Such a wonderful point, and that's why I love these chart examples. So for everybody watching, all of these chart examples have AA Rodden ratings, which are, the best you can pretty much get in a chart. So I love what you're saying about when you're looking at somebody's bio, you're going through maybe some timing techniques, seeing what's happening, just to make sure you're looking at the quality of data, because that's very important. If it's a C, if it's rectified, or it's a B, then you might
It
not
could
be, you
throw
might
everything off.
yeah, it can throw everything off. So yeah, just to make that point. So that's why I'm really glad you chose these chart examples.
And
But
the
fascinating.
dashas are actually calculated, those greater chapters of life we're in are calculated from the moon nakshatra. So the moon degree is quite important for that being accurate as well.
Oh wow. Okay.
And that's actually how you rectify a chart. So you would rectify a chart, like finding the correct birth time for someone by then asking questions about life events to then
Hmm,
ascertain, okay, this is the most likely, rising degree and moon nakshatra.
wonderful.
So then, yeah, Maria Montessori. So when her book got published in English is really when she became known for this Montessori method, and she became this like international teacher and known for her work. And it became like, yeah, this international style of teaching, which again, she didn't even really say that was, it's not like, maybe if she was more of the creator, more of the, yeah, like a leader archetype, that would have been her why. Like, I want to pioneer new education. But no, her why was more, I want to support children and I want to, not that I'm not judging either one. It's just, we can just understand it was like, the why is important. The why is what keeps us going on our path. And for her, it was about more supporting children in a different way. And then the system kind of birthed from that. And it became very successful. But she wasn't like, I'm going to set out to create this new educational system. It's going to become successful. I think a lot of us can get caught in like, well, what's going to be successful and what do people want versus like, what is our greater why? So I think she really embodies that. And, you know, when that was published, she was having the North Node was transiting through her ninth at the time, and the sun was in her ninth house. But then she also had Jupiter coming into approaching her Saturn in the fifth. And like I mentioned, she was in a fifth in a she was in a Saturn uh, dasha during this period. So that fifth house was also like activated in that way.
That's a wonderful connection. Like you say, you got the Jupiter transit in the fifth, rule in the ninth, and all those connections there. So publishing a book, very ninth house topic going on. So again, the timing is just on point. Wonderful.
Mhm. And then Toni Morrison won a Pulitzer Prize, which is a pretty big deal, you would say. And she had a few activations going. She had Venus kind of conjoining her ascendant there. I can't see the degree of her ascendant. And that, yeah, I think it's 2 degrees.
To yeah.
And then Mars had just entered her ninth, approaching the midheaven. And that can be a major, any trigger, coming into the midheaven too, can mark, especially within our work, big opportunities and achievement milestone points, let's say.
Mm,
And when she won the Nobel Prize, which is a huge deal, she had Jupiter, very benefic planet, right, going through her fifth with that south node. So yeah, it's crazy how it's like so the timing is so rhythmic. It's like and you can know it's like when we're working at something to know, okay, these might be the moments that all my work is finally like it's finally clicking.
I love these examples. I'm just looking here, won the Nobel Peace Prize, and you've got that on the right hand side. We've got that Saturn domicile ruling the midheaven of the chart, just sneaking out of the ninth, but it looks like it might be going back in. So that's remarkable, so visible. And again, just because it's a malefic, it's still an achievement. It's success with that hard work and that reward. So I love this example.
Yeah, and like truly, our dharma isn't something all at once. It's not like something you have to like figure out all at once, and it doesn't unfold all at once. So people that don't feel connected to their why or their purpose, just knowing that, it's a process that unfolds over time. But if you can kind of identify these three houses, if you can identify to some of those other points, your soul planet, your Varna type, you start to be able to kind of put all the pieces together. Because most people do know. I feel, most people do kind of know what their deepest passion is, right? The fifth house is
Mm.
kind of, I always tell people, it's like, what did you like to do when you were a kid? That's like the fifth house. Well, what were you naturally just as a kid doing for your joy? And a lot of people think that they can't make that their work. And I want to live in a world where everyone does. Like I'm a
Mm.
Sag, I'm very idealistic. I want to live in a world where everyone is fulfilling their dharma and it's supporting that. And ideally, from this ancient system, that is how it's supposed to work. We're supposed to just first align to our calling, then we get the material security comes from that, and the right people come from that. Everything just flows from that starting point. And a lot of, careers, I think, especially big organizations, people can kind of be placed willy-nilly, but it doesn't mean you have to necessarily quit your job that you're currently doing. It might be just making one little adjustment with how you contribute in your current role that kind of activates these places.
So, in your experience and working with clients, what other helpful tips do you give them, or how do you, I don't know, if coaching is probably the wrong word, but what's your experience with the clients in terms of trying to find their alignment? Do you usually find more people are more hesitant because they're finding they're blocked in some way, or is it more of a case that people don't know what they really want to be doing, or is it a bit of a mix? What do you find, or what have
Well,
you found in your
typically, if
experience?
someone's having like harsh transits to these houses, like where there's squares going on, is usually when they're at that point of like um, what's the word? Rethinking everything,
Yeah.
like actually wanting to maybe course correct or having those moments of like questioning. But I would say the biggest thing is like just making small, like the best thing that helps them is just make one small pivot. So
Mm.
often it's not that they don't know what their higher path is. A lot of the times I think people do know. That's right. The astrology is just a validation, right? And you probably have that experience with clients where they get a reading and they're like, oh, cool. Or they were already doing that kind of thing. Like, it's just a mirror. And
Mm.
often people on a deep soul level do know, especially people who've been kind of working on themselves or self-aware, but it's just that they're not creating the kind of circumstances, like they're not letting themselves in a way.
Mm.
They just literally might be overburdened by six house responsibilities and there's nothing wrong with like doing your responsibilities, but sometimes they might literally just might not have the space to make room for what they really want to be doing. So it can just be like getting rid of one small responsibility off their plate so that they have like spaciousness in their
Mm.
schedule, in their time, to exercise that fifth house thing. Or maybe it could look like within their current role, like taking on new responsibilities that more honor their creative gifts. Because they might be in a workplace, like an organization that really aligns with their ninth house. Like, say they care a lot about the environment, and that's like their greater kind of higher service, and they're in an organization that supports that, and they really believe in the organization. But maybe their role in their job, they could be exercising more of their natural creative gifts in that role, if that makes sense. So it doesn't always look like a big dramatic 180 of like
Sure.
sometimes people have those, right? Certain transits are like that, right? Like a Uranus opposition or something, where people are like, no, I need to be doing something completely different, or I've been repressing my true path this whole time. But I find more often people are kind of at least firing on one of these levels.
Yeah,
And
I
it's
just
just
love the material you're presenting today, and I need to incorporate some of these ideas. Especially, you've got me in a kick now to start looking through sidereal. But I love what you're saying, like bringing the first, the fifth, the ninth, and everything that you're incorporating. What I find generally, it's not only the transiting planets and other techniques that we use, but I always find the nodes interesting. in terms of course, life purpose. We can talk about this. When we have our own nodal return, I found, usually find people who find that kick and usually go on their way. If we're at the nodes at the crosses, where usually it is literally like a crossroads or cross purposes and like which direction do I go? Usually I find the most difficult times with the nodes is if we have the transiting north node on the south node and kind of the opposite in that sense. It's kind of like what the hell is going on? So I love
Yeah,
incorporating the nodes as well in terms of that.
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that can definitely be, yeah, the nodal return is a big one where people are like reorienting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's kind of that. If there's any other questions about any of the examples I gave or any of the material covered, I'm happy to answer that. But that was kind of, we could obviously go on longer, but I wanted to keep it at an hour talk. But I could probably find, 100 examples.
No, wonderful, Molly. Thank you so much for bringing this to us. And again, you've got me on a kick now to look at different ways, different zodiacs to look at sidereal primarily. But I love how you incorporate all these ideas, and these chart examples are fantastic. And I'm seeing them in a different light with these people, especially Steve Jobs, because I've looked at his chart for many years. So thank you so much for bringing these ideas forward. And talking about a bit more about you. So what has your background been in astrology or just life in general? What is your background? How did you come to this point?
Yeah, so I really always, from a young age, was like a guide. And like I will say that from being kind of a therapist to my much older siblings to then
Mm,
studying psychology in school. I majored in psych and philosophy. I always was interested in understanding people and like how they worked. And so coming to
mm,
astrology was a very natural progression for me. And I probably started seriously studying it right after college. And I was on a track to maybe become a therapist or go to grad school for psychology. I was working in a research addiction lab at UPenn. And I wasn't into it because a lot of it, I realized a lot of the research was based on what pharmaceutical company was funding the thing. So I wanted something deeper. I was always
mm,
looking for something kind of deeper. And I think having that philosophy background was what made me kind of maybe question things more. And I am a Sagittarius. So
mm,
I was just astrology. I came to it actually more in a healing crisis. I was reading up on like herbs and studying herbalism. I have a background in that and like more holistic systems. And astrology emerged as like, wow, it's like the holistic psychology. And so I really came into it from that psychology viewpoint. But then as I got deeper into it, and then obviously now I'm studying Vedic astrology a few years now, and it's like it gets into the karma of the whole thing, the timing of everything. And so it's a rabbit hole, as you know, and I think it's one of those professions or areas of interest that you just get kind of obsessed with. It's like the best way to put it. It's just, it's like you can't unsee it. So for me with astrology, it's like once I started learning it and then reading charts and like it's working. And I was a Western astrologer for like many years, just using the Western system, and it works, right? Yeah, it just became this thing, like I was compelled to study it. It wasn't even really like, oh, this is interesting. It's like, no, I have to study this. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it, and it's a passion at this point. And
I
then
love that Sagittarian attitude of going to learn different languages within astrology. So yeah, you're doing your Western, doing your tropical. Now you're going into the Vedic. So I just love that in depth and that exploration of going through that.
and
That's wonderful.
I do want to say, like, I approach, even though I'm using zodiac and the Vedic philosophy, I do approach it as it's not all fated. I think we do have a degree of free will. And what if the thing that you're meant to do, like only you're meant to do, your special potency in this life is like just has been sitting dormant. It's like, do you want to wait another year, another decade, another lifetime before you really activate that? So it's for me, it's like my beliefs is that all mental illness and addiction, especially, is like the root of it. I really think is not being connected to your purpose. And and I would love to really like at this stage in life, I would love to bring astrology into like treatment centers. I feel like that would be
Yeah.
very helpful for people who are struggling with addiction because it's It's like most people who are kind of fulfilled in their life might not even be interested in astrology. It's like, why would I need that? My life's fine, you know. Most people come to astrologers when things are like
Something going on their mind.
risky or yeah, they're going off the rails. And it's like this beautiful map that we can reorient to and just be like and breathe and just be patient with ourselves and also just be like honor ourselves. And so
Mm,
for me, it's like a panacea in that regard. Like if you can connect to your deeper purpose, your dharma, then I think it can cure a lot of ailments like depression or addictions. And it's just, yeah, it's just a great tool we have that you don't need to pop a pill, but you can just view
mm.
this mirror of yourself, connect deeper to yourself and how you fit into the greater whole and be in alignment.
And I love those points, and hopefully one day society integrates astrology into all of those fields because for us it's the most powerful tool. For me, it's the most powerful tool mankind has ever had is astrology. I could, background in psychology, I could throw away all those psychology books and just use the
That's how I kind
just
of
use the
feel.
astrology.
That's kind of how I feel now, because it's like getting to the root. It's like I view it, it's
Yeah.
like we're getting to the root of the problem. Or and I don't want to call it a problem, but you know what I mean? Like if we're trying to come into balance, it's getting to the root of whatever is getting us off balance. Or if we're off balance, it's like, well, this is why, and this is when it'll end.
Yeah.
That's when it should let up, you know?
Absolutely wonderful. Well, again, Molly, thank you so much for joining us today and
Yeah.
making me go down another rabbit hole. I'm very excited to incorporate your ideas that you brought here today. And as you can see on the screen, you can book a session with Molly. You can also go to lifemap.org. And Molly
Mhm.
also has a wonderful YouTube channel where I believe you dive in even deeper into a lot of these topics as well.
Yeah, I have a 6 week program where in my website, I'll just say real quick that we're going to go into not just these three houses we talked about, but go into like the material houses. So how people are ideally meant to receive resources. And it's going to basically be a 6 week journey using your chart to connect deeper to your calling, your purpose, but also in a way that really like you can prosper from. So especially if you're a person that wants to create a business, it's kind of really designed for people that are entrepreneurs or like they want to support their business through this work.
Yeah.
And understanding the Kairos moments, those divine alignment moments where you can make strides in your work, and also just so your business is kind of like I come from a more feminine model of like making it work for you and flow. So it's not something you have to like hustle and grind at, but really it's just like aligning to your natural timing anyway. And you're in a more of a state of resonance. So that's the idea behind the program. I have free course, let's say, on my, it's not really a quiz, but it's like a course on the Varna types. If you want to just subscribe to my email list, you can get that. And then I'm going to be releasing a class soon on astrology for investing,
Mm.
investing in stocks, like knowing and even cryptos, but using astrology as a tool for investing. So that'll be coming soon too.
That sounds wonderful. My portfolios is starting to jump back up as crypto's bouncing back, but that's for a different episode.
Yeah, totally. I know I want to do a talk on that. It's a rich topic.
I love it. I love it. Well, again, Molly, thank you so much. And for everybody watching, leave the links below in the description. And it's been a great pleasure to have you here today. And thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Wonderful. See you all again next time. We'll see you in the next episode. Bye, everyone.